No, no, this can't be right. Who is this? This is my place.
You. I know who you are. What did you do to my husband's grave?
Mrs. Johnson,
Don't Mrs. Johnson me. I've been waiting for this. What is this? A surveillance photo? That's not my signature. My mental capacity, this is out.
I don't understand. This isn't real. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. Your son sold it.
The grave beside my husband's had my name on the deed for 23 years. But when I visited Maple Grove Cemetery on the anniversary of James's death, I found a fresh wooden marker planted in my empty plot with another family's name printed across it. I marched into the office demanding an explanation. The cemetery manager took one look at my face and went pale. "Mrs. Clara Wallace," he whispered. Then he pulled out a folder containing my photograph, a forged signature, and a document claiming I was mentally incapable of making my own decisions. "Your son sold this grave 3 weeks ago," he said, "and the new owner's funeral is on Friday. Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video and subscribe if you believe growing older should never mean losing your voice. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there." For 23 years, the empty grave beside my husband had never looked empty to me. It had always felt like a promise. James and I bought those 2 plots when we were both still healthy enough to joke about death. I was 46 and he was 50. We had gone to Maple Grove Memorial Park to attend the funeral of one of his former coworkers. After the service, while everyone else hurried toward their cars beneath a cold November rain, James stood beneath an old maple tree and stared across the quiet hillside. "This is peaceful," he said. I frowned at him. "James Wallace, we are not spending our Saturday shopping for graves." He laughed so loudly that 2 mourners turned to look at us. But the following spring we returned. Maple Grove was an old cemetery on the western edge of Richmond, with stone paths, flowering dogwoods, and rows of markers worn smooth by decades of rain. The oldest section sat on a gentle rise overlooking a narrow creek. It was there that James chose 2 adjoining plots beneath a red maple tree. He stood between them, placed one hand over his heart, and said, "No matter how many times life separates us, Clara will end up side by side." I told him he was being dramatic. The truth was, I loved him even more for saying it. We paid for those plots slowly, 1 monthly installment at a time. We were not wealthy. James repaired heating and cooling systems, and I worked as an elementary school librarian. Every dollar mattered. But he insisted that settling those arrangements was a kindness we could give each other and Andrew. "No child should have to make decisions like this while grieving," James said. At the time, Andrew was 20, still in college, still calling home whenever he needed advice about laundry or rent. I could not imagine him becoming the kind of man who would sell his own mother's grave. Standing in Samuel Carter's, I wished I could return to those simpler years. Samuel had given me a glass of water, but my hands shook too badly to lift it. He suggested I sit for a few minutes before we went back outside. I stared at the folder on his desk. "My son knew what that plot meant to me," I said. Samuel's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wallace." "Clara," I whispered. "Please call me Clara." He nodded. James had been buried at Maple Grove 3 years earlier after a stroke took him from me in less than 48 hours. Andrew had been attentive during the funeral. He held my arm as we walked behind the casket. He checked that I ate. He stayed at my house for a week and answered every phone call because I could barely speak without crying. When the workers lowered James into the ground, Andrew stood beside me and looked at the empty plot. "At least you know you'll be beside Dad someday," he had said. I had believed those words came from love. After James's death, Andrew began helping me with the practical things that grief made difficult. He organized the utility bills, helped close James's business accounts, and drove me to appointments when I did not feel ready to drive myself. At first I was grateful. Then his help slowly became supervision. He began asking why I still needed such a large house. He suggested I sell and move into an apartment. Later he started bringing brochures for retirement communities. "You'd have people around you," he said. "Meals, activities, nurses if you ever need them." "I have neighbors," I replied. "I have church. I have my garden." He would sigh as though I were a stubborn child refusing to wear a coat. Megan was subtler. She never directly told me I was incapable of living alone. Instead, she created small moments that made me doubt myself. Once I placed my reading glasses beside the telephone. When I returned from the kitchen, they were gone. Megan helped me search for nearly 20 minutes before finding them inside a drawer I rarely used. "You must have put them there without thinking," she said gently. Another time, she offered to arrange a dental appointment. She told me it was scheduled for Thursday, but when I arrived, the receptionist said the appointment had been made for Wednesday and marked as missed. Megan touched my shoulder when I told her. "Clara, you've been forgetting more lately." I had begun writing appointments on a calendar after that. Yet dates still changed. Items still disappeared. Andrew and Megan always seemed to be nearby when it happened. Back then I blamed grief. Now seated across from the cemetery manager, those memories felt different. Samuel took me back to the huts in a small electric cart. The afternoon sun had disappeared behind heavy clouds, and the air smelled of damp soil. James's granite marker stood exactly as I remembered it. James Robert Wallace, beloved husband and father, 1948 to 2023. I knelt and brushed a few leaves away from the base. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Beside his grave, a wooden stake had been driven into the earth. A laminated card attached to it bore the name Ellison and the date of a funeral scheduled 3 days later. The grass had already been cut away in a neat rectangle. My stomach turned. "They've started preparing it," Samuel said quietly. "No digging yet. I stopped the crew as soon as you arrived." I touched the ground with the tips of my fingers. That patch of earth had been part of my future for more than 2 decades. Now it had been priced, signed away, and assigned to a stranger without anyone asking whether I was still breathing. "Who bought it?" I asked. "A widow named Ruth Ellison. Her husband passed away 2 days ago." I closed my eyes. Another woman was grieving just as I had grieved for James. She probably believed she had legally purchased a peaceful resting place for the man she loved. Andrew's betrayal had not only wounded me, it had placed an innocent widow in the middle of his deception. As we stood there, I remembered something I had nearly forgotten. 6 months after James died, Andrew came to my house and asked about the cemetery certificate. He claimed he needed it to update the family estate records. I told him the original deed was in the small fireproof safe in my bedroom closet. "I can get it for you," I had said. He smiled and stopped me. "No, Mom. Sit down. I know where the safe is." At the time, I thought nothing of it. During James's final hospital stay, I had given Andrew the spare key so he could retrieve our insurance documents. I could still see myself pressing it into his palm beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care waiting room. I had never asked for that key back. Samuel watched my face. "Did your son have access to the original certificate?" "Yes," I said. The word felt like an admission of guilt. When I returned home that evening, I went straight to my bedroom closet. The safe sat behind a row of winter coats. Its lock showed no sign of damage. I searched the jewelry box where I kept the spare key. The small brass hook was empty. I opened the safe with my own key and moved aside the folders one by one. The insurance policies were there. My birth certificate was there. James's military discharge papers were there. But the cemetery certificate was gone. So was the copy of the document showing that the plot beside James belonged to me. I sat on the bedroom floor surrounded by papers and felt something inside me change. Until that moment, a frightened part of me had wanted to believe there had been a mistake. Perhaps Andrew misunderstood a form. Perhaps someone at the cemetery had processed the wrong plot. Perhaps my son had made one foolish decision under pressure. But Andrew had taken the key. He had opened my safe. He had removed the proof that the grave belonged to me. And he had done it long before I knew I needed to protect myself from him. The next morning, I returned to Maple Grove before the office opened. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Andrew standing beside James's hospital bed, the spare key resting in his palm. Grief had made trust feel necessary. I had been losing my husband. I never imagined I also needed to protect myself from my son. Samuel arrived at 7:30 carrying coffee and a ring of keys. When he saw me waiting, he did not look surprised. "I thought you might come back," he said. "I need to see everything." He unlocked the office and led me into a conference room. The folder from the day before was already on the table. Samuel closed the blinds. "I'm not supposed to release original records without authorization," he said. "But you are the person named in them. You have the right to know what was filed in your name." He slid the first page toward me. At the bottom was my signature. For one terrible second, it looked real. The letters leaned slightly to the right, just as mine did. The capital C curled inward. The final stroke beneath Wallace stretched into a thin line. Andrew had watched me sign birthday cards, school forms, checks, and tax papers for more than 40 years. He knew the shape of my hand almost as well as I did. But he had missed one thing. I pointed to the W in Wallace. "That isn't mine." Samuel leaned closer. "My W has 3 sharp peaks," I said. "James used to tease me that it looked like a tiny crown. This one has only 2. Samuel examined it with a magnifying glass. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." That small mistake steadied me. The document was no longer mysterious or powerful. It was a lie written by someone who assumed I would never inspect it. The transfer agreement stated that I had voluntarily sold my burial rights for $32,000. $32,000. Samuel nodded. "That section of Maple Grove has been closed to new sales for 9 years. Family plots there are rare. James and I had paid less than $4,000 for both spaces. Andrew had turned our final promise into a profitable piece of real estate." The next document was a power of attorney naming him as my legal representative. It gave him authority over real estate bank accounts, insurance policies, medical decisions, and final disposition arrangements. I never signed this. Samuel turned the page. It was notarized. The form claimed I had appeared with Andrew on March 12th and shown my Virginia driver's license. On March 12th, I had been at Lily's school watching her spring concert. I remembered because James's birthday was the following day. Lily had played the piano piece he used to hum while working around the house. "Can you prove where you were?" Samuel asked. "There were hundreds of people in that auditorium. And photographs." "Good. Remember that." The third document hurt more than the forged signature. It was a physician's statement saying I had shown signs of confusion, short-term memory loss, and impaired judgment. It recommended that a trusted relative assist me with financial and legal matters. The doctor's name was Preston Hale. I knew him. Megan had arranged an appointment with him 5 months earlier, saying he specialized in older patients. But Dr. Hale had not tested my memory. He had asked about my blood pressure, sleep, appetite, and grief after James's death. The visit lasted perhaps 20 minutes. "He never said I was impaired," I told Samuel. "The letter doesn't say you were formally diagnosed," Samuel replied. "It uses cautious language." I read it again. "Possible decline. Reported episodes. Family concern. Nothing definite but enough to create doubt." "Who reported those episodes?" Samuel pointed to the final paragraph. "My son and daughter-in-law." A coldness spread through me. Andrew and Megan had told the doctor I wandered outside at night, forgot to turn off the stove, and became confused while driving. None of it was true. Samuel opened another folder. This is where I became concerned. Inside was a photocopy of my driver's license and a color photograph of me sitting at my kitchen table. I wore a pale blue cardigan. A mug rested in front of me. My eyes were lowered toward a stack of mail. The picture had been taken from behind the doorway. A handwritten note on the back read, "Current photograph of principal taken during period of observed confusion." My throat tightened. That was Thanksgiving morning. I remembered the cardigan. Megan had offered to help prepare dinner. Andrew had arrived early and spent nearly an hour pretending to fix my wireless internet. Lily had been upstairs. Someone had stood in my hallway and photographed me like evidence. "I wasn't confused," I said. "I was reading an insurance letter." Samuel's expression hardened. "I believe you." That simple sentence nearly broke me. For months, Andrew and Megan had treated every hesitation, misplaced word, and moment of sadness as proof my mind was slipping. Hearing someone believe me felt like being handed back a piece of myself. Why was this approved? The transfer went through corporate legal, Samuel said. The documents appeared complete. Power of attorney notarization, medical support identification. I questioned why you hadn't appeared in person, but I was told the authorization was sufficient. And you recognized me because of this photograph. Yes. I reviewed it yesterday when the burial order came through. When you walked into my office, I thought you already knew. I knew nothing. Samuel explained that the sale had not yet been fully finalized in the cemetery's system. Ruth Ellison had paid Andrew and Andrew had assigned the burial right to her family, but an actual burial would make the dispute far harder to reverse. How much time do I have? The service is Friday at 11. I can place an administrative hold for 48 hours, perhaps 72, if I document suspected fraud. After that, corporate counsel may force me to proceed unless you provide a court order or formal legal challenge. It was Wednesday morning. 3 days stood between me and another man being buried in the place I had intended to rest beside James. I gathered the copies into a neat stack. Then I noticed a line near the bottom of the physician's letter. Purpose of evaluation support for guardianship and asset management planning. I read it aloud. Samuel stared at the page. The room suddenly seemed too quiet. This had never been only about a grave. The photograph, the doctor's letter, the forged power of attorney. Andrew was building a record. He wanted strangers to believe I was confused, dependent, and incapable of understanding my own affairs. The grave was merely the first thing he had sold. If no one had recognized my face, it would not have been the last. I drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Richmond's afternoon traffic moved around me in a blur, but I barely noticed the cars. My mind replayed the same sentence over and over. Purpose of evaluation support for guardianship and asset management planning. Andrew had not simply stolen my burial plot. He had been preparing to take my entire life. By the time I turned onto my quiet street, I had made one decision. Samuel was right. I could not confront Andrew, not yet. If he realized I knew the truth, he would have time to destroy evidence, move money, and invent another story before I had a chance to protect myself. So I parked in my driveway, straightened my blouse, and practiced smiling. For the first time in my life, I was going to lie to my own son. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the house before I even opened the front door. Voices came from the kitchen. Andrew laughed at something Megan had said, and Lily was setting the dining room table. It looked like any ordinary family dinner. "Mom," Andrew called when he saw me. "We were getting worried." "Worried? You were gone most of the day." "I stopped by the cemetery." His eyes searched my face. "How was it?" I forced myself to shrug. "Quiet. Nothing more." For a brief second, something flashed across his expression. Relief. He thought everything had gone according to plan. He thought I had visited James's grave without discovering that he had already sold the ground beside it. Megan carried a bowl of mashed potatoes to the table. "Sit down, Clara. Dinner's almost ready." Her smile looked exactly as it always had. Kind, patient, almost daughterly. If I hadn't seen the physician's letter that morning, I would never have guessed she had spent months describing me as mentally confused. I took my usual seat. Lily smiled warmly. "Hi, Grandma." "Hello, sweetheart." Unlike her parents, Lily never pretended. If she was happy, everyone knew. If she was worried, it showed immediately. Tonight she looked uneasy. Andrew carved the chicken. "So," he spoke casually while placing slices onto everyone's plate, "did you spend much time at Dad's grave?" "A little." "You feeling okay?" "I'm fine." "You know," Megan added gently, "grief changes over time. Some people don't realize how exhausting it can be." I nodded without looking at her. "It can." Andrew cleared his throat. "I've actually been thinking, here it comes, about the future." I nearly laughed. Everything with Andrew had become about my future, never my present. "We found another retirement community," Megan said. She pulled a glossy brochure from her purse. "Golden Meadows Senior Living, elegant apartments, gardens, restaurant dining, 24-hour nursing staff." She slid it toward me. "They have wonderful activities." "I don't need activities." "They also have transportation." I still drive. Andrew smiled patiently. We know. His tone reminded me of the way teachers speak to frightened children. But someday driving won't be safe. Someday. Exactly. He leaned forward. We're only trying to plan ahead. Planning ahead. That phrase suddenly made me sick. They had planned ahead. They had planned forged signatures. They had planned physician statements. They had planned photographs. They had planned to sell the place beside my husband before I had even taken my last breath. I folded the brochure and placed it beside my plate. I'll think about it. Andrew visibly relaxed. He expected an argument. Instead, I gave him none. The less suspicious he became, the safer my evidence would be. Dinner continued almost normally. Lily talked about school. Megan discussed church volunteers. Andrew complained about interest rates and the housing market. Every sentence sounded ordinary, yet now I heard hidden meanings everywhere. When Andrew complained about money, I wondered whether he was thinking about the $32,000 from my grave. When Megan asked whether I had paid my electric bill, I wondered if she was checking whether I still controlled my bank account. When they asked whether I had remembered to take my vitamins, I wondered how many people they had already told I couldn't remember anything. Halfway through dinner, I decided to test Andrew. I spent a while sitting beside your father today. He looked up. I miss him. I know, Mom. I always feel comforted knowing I'll be beside him one day. His knife stopped moving for barely a second, then he smiled. You will. The lie came so easily. I made him that promise. You don't have to worry about Dad's grave. I've taken care of everything. Everything. The word echoed inside me. He had indeed taken care of everything, just not for me. I forced myself to smile. I'm glad. Megan quickly changed the subject. So, Clara, we heard the Maple Street house finally sold. The conversation drifted toward neighborhood gossip. No one mentioned cemeteries again. After dinner, Lily helped me carry dishes into the kitchen. When her parents stepped outside onto the back porch to answer a phone call, she quietly spoke. Grandma, I looked at her. Can I ask you something? Of course. She lowered her voice. Have you been forgetting things lately? The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? She hesitated. Dad says you forget a lot. I kept my face calm. What does he say? Just. She looked toward the back door. That sometimes you don't remember conversations, or appointments, or where you put things. My heart sank. Andrew hadn't only told doctors, he'd been preparing his own daughter. I placed a hand over hers. Lily, do you think I seem confused? She looked directly into my eyes. No. Then why does Dad keep saying it? Children notice more than adults realize. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups tell themselves stories because they want something very badly. She frowned. What do they want? I don't know yet. That wasn't entirely true. I knew enough. I simply wasn't ready to burden a 16-year-old with the truth. Andrew walked back inside. What are my favorite girls talking about? School, Lily answered quickly. He smiled. Good. The moment disappeared. An hour later, I drove home alone. The house felt painfully quiet. James had always filled silence by humming while he repaired something around the house. Now the only sound came from the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. I went directly to my bedroom. The safe still stood open where I had left it. One by one, I examined every folder again. Insurance, birth certificates, tax records, military papers, missing, missing, missing. Then something caught my attention. A small stack of unopened mail sat beneath a pile of grocery advertisements. I didn't remember placing it there. The top envelope was from the county courthouse. My name appeared across the front. The postmark was 6 days old. Why hadn't I seen it? I opened it carefully. The first sentence drained the remaining warmth from my body. Notice of petition for emergency guardianship hearing. Petitioner Andrew Wallace. Grounds suspected cognitive decline, financial vulnerability. Need for immediate appointment of temporary guardian. Hearing date 3 days away, Friday morning. the same morning another family planned to bury their loved one in the grave meant for me. Suddenly everything connected. The forged physician's statement, the power of attorney, the hidden photographs, the missing cemetery certificate. If Andrew won temporary guardianship on Friday morning, he would legally control my finances before anyone questioned the grave sale. My knees weakened. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the notice. Then I noticed another sentence. The petitioner requests immediate authority over all financial accounts, real property legal documents, healthcare decisions, and estate management. Everything. Not just my burial plot. Not just my house. Everything I owned. Everything James and I had built over 46 years of marriage. Everything could disappear with one judge's signature. I folded the notice slowly. Then I reached into my desk drawer and removed a small digital voice recorder James had once used during business inspections. Its batteries were still good. I pressed the red button. "If anyone ever hears this," I whispered, "today is the day I stopped believing my son was making mistakes and started believing he was making plans." I set the recorder beside my bed. From that moment forward, every conversation would matter. Every word could become evidence. And for the first time since Andrew was born, I realized I needed to protect myself from my own child. I arrived at Diane Brooks's office 15 minutes before she opened. The brick building stood just a few blocks from the courthouse in downtown Richmond. James and I had walked through those doors dozens of times over the years. Diane had handled our wills, our home purchase, James's business paperwork, and eventually every document connected to our retirement. She knew our lives almost as well as we did. When her receptionist saw me waiting outside, she unlocked the door early. "Mrs. Wallace, I need to see Diane. There isn't an appointment until—" "It's about James." The receptionist immediately nodded. "Please come in." 5 minutes later, Diane hurried into the conference room carrying a leather briefcase. She was 61 now, her auburn hair streaked with silver, but her sharp blue eyes hadn't changed in the 25 years I'd known her. "Clara." She sat beside me instead of across the table. "You look frightened." "I am." Without saying another word, I handed her the copies Samuel had made. She read silently, page after page. Her face remained calm until she reached the forged power of attorney. Then she removed her glasses. "Oh my God. I never signed it. I know. You know," she tapped the document with one finger, "because I drafted your real power of attorney." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick client file labeled Wallace Family Estate. Within moments, she located a blue folder. "This," she laid the original document beside the forged one, "is the only power of attorney you have ever signed." The difference was obvious. My real document was only 6 pages long. The forged version exceeded 20. "The one you signed after James retired," Diane explained, "was extremely limited." She pointed to the first paragraph. "It only authorized emergency medical decisions if you became physically unable to communicate." I leaned closer. "It specifically prohibited the sale of real estate, financial accounts, burial rights, investments, or any property unless you personally signed in front of witnesses. So Andrew couldn't have used this." "No." She looked directly into my eyes. "Which means someone created an entirely new document." I felt both relieved and devastated. Part of me had wondered whether grief had made me forget signing something years ago. Now there was no doubt. Someone had deliberately manufactured authority that never existed. Diane continued reading. When she reached the physician's statement, she frowned. "Preston Hale. You know him. We've crossed paths in guardianship hearings. Is he trustworthy?" She chose her next words carefully. "He usually is." That answer surprised me. So why would he write this? He may not realize how his letter was being used. She handed it back. "Notice the language." I reread the first paragraph. It never actually declared me incompetent. It merely repeated concerns reported by family members. Andrew and Megan supplied the information. Exactly. If they lied, then the foundation of this letter collapses. For the first time since leaving Maple Grove, I felt a small spark of hope. Diane reached for her phone. "I want to request Dr. Hale's complete records immediately." Before dialing, she looked at another page. Then she stopped. What? The notary. She pointed to the seal stamped across the bottom of the forged power of attorney. I read the name. Angela Morris. Diane sighed. I know her too. Who is she? She's Megan's cousin. The room fell silent. You've got to be kidding. I wish I were. Diane searched the state notary database on her computer. Within seconds, Angela Morris's information appeared. Commission active, County of Henrico, business address. Diane slowly turned the monitor toward me. The address belonged to a small accounting office. Megan had once invited me there to help file taxes. I remembered Angela bringing coffee into the conference room. She had hugged Megan goodbye. Family. Another piece slid into place. They planned this together. Diane nodded. It certainly appears that way. She opened a yellow legal pad. We're treating this as organized financial exploitation. The words sounded harsh, yet they fit. Financial exploitation. Not misunderstanding, not poor judgment, not desperation, exploitation. Now, Diane said, tell me everything else. I described the missing cemetery certificate, the photograph hidden inside the transfer file, the guardianship hearing, Andrew's questions about retirement communities, Megan moving my belongings and suggesting I was becoming forgetful, Lily quietly asking whether I truly had memory problems. Diane wrote continuously. When I finished, she sat back. This has been developing for months. I know. Probably longer. She opened another file. Let's look at your financial accounts. I handed her my banking information. She logged into the secure client portal. Within minutes, her expression darkened again. Clara. What? Did you authorize a home equity line of credit? No. Ever. Never. She turned the monitor toward me. 6 months earlier, a $62,000 line of credit had been opened against my home. $48,000 had already been withdrawn. I stared at the numbers. I've never seen this. You receive paper statements. I always have. When was the last one? I searched my memory. I couldn't remember. Not because I was confused. Because Andrew had insisted on helping with my mail after James died. He said he'd sort the important bills, I whispered. Diane nodded slowly. I thought so. She clicked through the transaction history. Large transfers, construction payments, business deposits. Then one name appeared repeatedly. Wallace Premier Development LLC. Andrew's company. I covered my mouth. He used my house to finance his business. My voice barely emerged. Without asking, without telling me, without even leaving enough money untouched to hide what he had done forever. Diane immediately called the bank's fraud department. She instructed them to place emergency restrictions on additional withdrawals until ownership could be verified. Then she drafted notices challenging the cemetery transfer. By noon, she had completed 3 separate legal filings. Watching her work reminded me of James. Calm, methodical, never wasting movement. Finally, she closed the final folder. There is one more thing. She unlocked tall, fireproof cabinet behind her desk. Inside sat dozens of sealed envelopes. She removed one larger than the others. Across the front, in James's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 words, "For Diane only, if necessary." My throat tightened. When did he leave this? 5 years ago. He never told me. He specifically instructed me not to. I stared at my husband's handwriting. It felt as though he had suddenly walked back into the room. What is it? I don't know. You never opened it. No. She turned the envelope over. The wax seal remained intact. He gave me very specific instructions. What instructions? She read from a note attached to the client file. Do not open unless there is credible evidence that Clara Wallace is being coerced, defrauded, declared mentally incompetent for financial gain, or deprived of her legal property. Tears filled my eyes. James had anticipated something. Not necessarily Andrew, but the possibility that someday someone might try to take advantage of me. He always worried about me. Diane smiled sadly. He worried because he loved you. Can we open it? She shook her head. Not yet. Why not? Because your husband was incredibly precise. She pointed to the final sentence. Only after objective evidence of fraud has been independently established. We're close, she said. But legally, I want stronger proof. I looked again at the sealed envelope. Whatever James had placed inside, he had expected it might someday protect me. Diane carefully returned it to the cabinet. I promise you this. She locked the door. If your husband left you a shield, we're going to make sure it's used exactly the way he intended. As I prepared to leave, Diane handed me a checklist. Starting today, do not meet Andrew alone. Record every conversation if state law allows. Keep copies of every document outside your home. And most importantly, she looked at me with complete seriousness. Stop assuming your son knows what you know. I frowned. What do you mean? He believes you're confused. He believes you're vulnerable. Those assumptions are the only advantage you currently have. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood. Andrew thought he was several moves ahead. He had no idea I was already building a case that could destroy every lie he had carefully constructed. And somewhere inside Diane's locked cabinet, James had left one final move that neither of us had seen. Friday's guardianship hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning. The funeral at Maple Grove was scheduled for 11. Every clock I looked at suddenly seemed louder. By Wednesday afternoon, Diane had already filed emergency objections to the cemetery transfer, contacted the bank's fraud division, and requested records from Dr. Preston Hale's office. But one problem remained. Andrew had asked the court to appoint him as my temporary guardian before anyone had the chance to fully investigate. If the judge granted that request even for a few weeks, Andrew would gain legal authority over nearly every part of my life. He could access my finances. He could make medical decisions. He could claim control over my property. And worst of all, he could argue that every objection I made afterward was simply proof that I no longer understood reality. The legal strategy was horrifying in its simplicity. Convince the court I was confused, control my assets, then use that control as evidence that I had always needed someone else to manage my affairs. By Thursday morning, Diane called me before 8. I have good news. I almost smiled for the first time in days. What is it? I found an independent geriatric specialist willing to evaluate you today. When? 10:30. Will that help? It could save everything. The appointment took place at Richmond Memory and Aging Center. Unlike my brief visit with Dr. Hale months earlier, this evaluation lasted almost 3 hours. Dr. Eleanor Matthews greeted me warmly. I understand you're under tremendous stress, she said. I am. But stress isn't the same thing as dementia. Her words immediately relaxed me. She explained every test before beginning. Memory recall, problem solving, attention, language, mathematics, visual reasoning. She asked me today's date, the names of recent presidents. She gave me 5 unrelated words to remember. She had me draw a clock showing a specific time. She asked about James, about my childhood, about Andrew, about my medications. Not once did she rush. Not once did she treat me like a child. Near the end, she folded her hands. Mrs. Wallace. Yes. Your cognitive testing is entirely within the normal range for a healthy woman your age. I felt tears fill my eyes. So, I see absolutely no evidence that you lack decision-making capacity. She smiled gently. In fact, your reasoning and memory are excellent. I laughed through my tears. I've never been happier to pass an exam. She laughed with me. I'll prepare the report immediately. By noon, Diane had received the completed evaluation. The conclusion was unmistakable. No dementia, no significant cognitive impairment, fully capable of managing financial and legal affairs independently. One major piece of Andrew's case had collapsed, but Diane wasn't finished. That afternoon, she invited me back to her office. A forensic accountant named Michael Reyes joined us. Stacks of bank statements covered the conference table. Michael adjusted his glasses. We've been tracing the money. He highlighted several transfers with a yellow marker. The $32,000 from the cemetery sale didn't stay in Andrew's personal account. It didn't. No. He pointed farther down the page. It moved into Wallace Premier Development within 48 hours. Andrew's struggling real estate company, the same company that had borrowed against my house. Michael continued. From there, he opened another statement. Payments were made to contractors, overdue suppliers, and private lenders. Diane looked at me. He wasn't buying luxury cars. No. He was trying to keep his business alive. For a brief moment, I almost pitied him. I remembered Andrew at 12 years old building birdhouses with James in our garage. I remembered his first baseball glove, his college graduation, the day he proudly showed me the tiny office he rented for his first real estate business. Somewhere along the way, success had become more important to him than honesty. Michael interrupted my thoughts. There's more. He produced another document. Andrew's company owed nearly $400,000. Several construction projects had stopped after county inspectors found structural code violations. Banks had begun demanding repayment. Private investors wanted their money back. The business wasn't simply struggling, it was collapsing. Diane spoke quietly. Now we know why he became desperate. I nodded slowly. Desperate. But desperation didn't forge signatures. Desperation didn't sell your mother's grave. Desperation didn't convince doctors she was losing her mind. Those were choices. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. Lily. She almost never called me directly. Grandma? Her voice sounded shaky. Sweetheart, are you okay? I don't have much time. My heart immediately began racing. What's wrong? Dad's in the shower. Mom went to the grocery store. She lowered her voice even further. I heard them talking last night. I remained silent. I think they're planning something after court. What did they say? She swallowed. Dad said once the judge signs the papers, they'll finally be able to sell your house. I closed my eyes. So it wasn't just the cemetery. No. What else? They said you'd be living somewhere with nurses. A place where, her voice broke, where you couldn't interfere anymore. My chest tightened. Lily, I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. I didn't know. I thought they were really helping you. I could hear her crying quietly. Then she whispered something that made every hair on my arms stand up. I found a folder on Dad's laptop. What kind of folder? It had your name. Inside were scanned copies of my driver's license, bank statements, photographs, medical papers, everything neatly organized. When did you see it? This morning. Did your dad know? No. Lily, don't touch anything else. I won't. She hesitated. I also heard Mom say, what? That after the court hearing, nobody would believe anything you said. The words struck harder than any document I had read. Nobody would believe me. That had been the plan all along. Destroy my credibility first. Steal everything afterward. I have to go, Lily whispered. Promise me something. Anything. Be careful. I don't trust them anymore. The line disconnected. I stared at my phone for several seconds before speaking. Diane had heard almost the entire conversation. Did you record that? I slowly nodded. The digital recorder James once used for business inspections had been sitting beside my phone. Every word was preserved. Diane copied the recording immediately. Then she looked at me. Clara, I know this is painful, but your granddaughter may become one of the most important witnesses in this case. I looked out the office window. Rain had begun falling over Richmond. James used to love rainy afternoons. He always said rain washed dirt away, so you could finally see what was underneath. Perhaps he had been right, because beneath Andrew's careful smiles, beneath Megan's patient kindness, beneath every conversation about retirement communities and safety, the truth was finally visible. This wasn't panic. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't one terrible decision. My son had spent months constructing a legal trap. Every forged document, Every missing bank statement, every staged photograph, every conversation questioning my memory, every hidden loan, every lie told to doctors, every promise whispered to investors. Everything led toward Friday morning. I wasn't trying to protect me. He was preparing to replace me. And now, with less than 24 hours before the hearing, I finally had something Andrew had never expected: proof that I wasn't fighting alone. By the time the rain stopped Thursday evening, I had almost forgotten what silence sounded like. For 2 days, every hour had brought another phone call, another document, another terrible discovery. My dining room table had become a battlefield, covered with legal folders, bank statements, copies of cemetery records, and handwritten notes. Yet one question still lingered in my mind. How had Samuel recognized me so quickly? The answer, I suspected, lay somewhere inside Maple Grove's archives. Friday morning's hearing was less than 24 hours away when Diane called. Samuel found something. What? He doesn't want to discuss it over the phone. Can you meet us at the cemetery? I'll be there. An hour later, I drove beneath the stone entrance that James and I had passed through so many times before. The cemetery looked different now. Not because the landscape had changed, because I had. The familiar pathways no longer represented peaceful memories. They had become evidence. Samuel met Diane and me beside the administration building. He looked exhausted. I've been in the archives since 6 this morning. Did you find something? I found several things. Instead of leading us toward the office, he unlocked a heavy metal door marked Employees Only. A narrow staircase descended beneath the main building. The air grew cooler with every step. At the bottom lay a long storage room lined with metal shelves filled with oversized binders, maps, photographs, and handwritten ledgers dating back nearly a century. I forgot this place even existed, Diane admitted. Samuel smiled faintly. Most people do. He switched on another row of lights. Dust floated through the air. This cemetery has been here since the 1890s. We keep almost everything. He stopped beside a cabinet labeled Historical Records. I wasn't looking for your file. I was looking for the history of your section. He carefully removed an oversized album. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs, documenting restoration projects, memorial ceremonies, floods, and community events. Samuel slowly turned several pages. Then he stopped. There. My breath caught. The photograph had clearly been taken more than 20 years earlier. A much younger James stood beside me beneath the same red maple tree where his grave now rested. We were both smiling. James wore his favorite brown work jacket. I held a shovel covered in mud. Behind us stood another man I recognized only vaguely. Who is that? I asked. Samuel smiled. My father. I looked back at him. Your father. He managed Maple Grove before I did. Suddenly everything made sense. I remember him. My father always talked about you and James. He gently touched the edge of the photograph. 23 years ago, a flash flood nearly destroyed the oldest section of this cemetery. I remembered immediately. The creek had overflowed after several days of heavy rain. Dozens of old headstones shifted, retaining walls collapsed. Many families volunteered to help preserve the historic section. James insisted we spend every Saturday there for nearly 2 months. He wouldn't let your father work alone, I said quietly. Samuel nodded. Dad never forgot. He said your husband repaired broken stone walls until his hands bled. Tears blurred my vision. That sounded exactly like James. If something mattered, he never stopped until it was finished. Samuel continued turning pages. There were more photographs. James carrying sandbags, me planting flowers near damaged graves, community volunteers sharing sandwiches beneath temporary tents. Then Samuel removed another folder. This is even more important. Inside was the original purchase agreement for our burial plots. Unlike the copy Andrew had stolen, this version included handwritten notes from Samuel's father. Mr. and Mrs. Wallace personally selected adjoining plots after restoration work. Burial rights are non-transferable without personal appearance before cemetery administration while both owners remain living. I stared at the sentence. That's the original policy. Samuel nodded. My father insisted on writing additional notes whenever families had unique requests. So Andrew couldn't legally transfer it. Not without you appearing here. Diane smiled for the first time that morning. This is excellent. But there's more. Samuel reached for another binder. My father documented almost every unusual conversation. He opened to a page dated 23 years earlier. Mr. James Wallace requested written assurance that adjoining burial rights remain protected from third-party transfer during surviving spouse's lifetime. Reason given. If anything ever happens to me first, Clara deserves absolute peace. I covered my mouth. James, even then, he had worried about protecting me. He loved you very much, Samuel said softly. I know. I couldn't finish. The room remained silent for several moments. Then Samuel spoke again. My mother lost her house when I was 17. Both Diane and I looked at him. My uncle convinced her to sign papers she didn't understand after my father became ill. His voice remained steady, but I could hear old pain beneath every word. She trusted family. She lost everything. I suddenly understood why Samuel had risked his own position to help me. He wasn't simply doing his job. He had watched something frighteningly similar happen to someone he loved. I couldn't ignore what I saw in your file. You believed me before anyone else did. I recognized the pattern. His honesty touched me more deeply than I could express. Before I could answer, voices echoed from the hallway above. Footsteps. Then the basement door opened. A woman in her late 60s slowly descended the stairs. She carried a folded funeral program in one hand. I'm sorry, she said nervously. They told me someone could help me. Samuel looked surprised. Mrs. Ellison? She nodded. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, he introduced us. Clara Wallace. This is Ruth Ellison. The name hit me immediately. Ruth, the widow whose husband was scheduled to be buried in my grave. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from days of crying. She glanced at me politely without recognizing who I was. I'm trying to finalize tomorrow's arrangements. Samuel hesitated. Then he quietly said, Mrs. Ellison. This is Mrs. Clara Wallace. Confusion crossed her face. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Samuel took a slow breath. The burial plot you purchased belongs to her. The color drained from Ruth's face. She turned toward me. No. I bought that space legally. My funeral director handled everything. I paid $32,000. I have the contract. She spoke with the desperation of someone whose world had suddenly become unstable. My husband died on Monday. I buried my sister last year. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't do this again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked into her eyes. I didn't see an enemy. I saw another woman carrying unbearable grief. Another wife trying to honor promises made decades earlier. I don't blame you, I said gently. She stared at me. I blame the man who sold it. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't know. I believe you. She slowly lowered herself into a chair. My husband wanted to rest beneath that maple tree. So did mine. Silence filled the archive room. Two widows, one stolen promise, one man responsible for both. Diane finally spoke. Mrs. Ellison, would you be willing to show us your purchase documents? Ruth nodded. They're in my car. If someone deceived me, she looked directly at me. I'll testify. Samuel exchanged a glance with Diane. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to, because Andrew hadn't only committed fraud against me. He had manipulated another grieving family, another victim, another witness, and suddenly, our case had become much stronger than any of us imagined. Ruth Ellison returned 15 minutes later, carrying a thick blue folder pressed tightly against her chest. She looked as though she hadn't slept since her husband died. When she placed the folder on the archive table, her hands trembled so badly that Samuel quietly pulled out a chair for her. Take your time, he said. She nodded. My husband Harold planned everything before he passed. Her voice cracked. He had terminal cancer. We promised each other we wouldn't leave our children with difficult decisions. I understood exactly what she meant. James and I had made the same promise. Ruth slowly removed several documents: a receipt, a purchase agreement, proof of payment, copies of emails. Everything looked organized, too organized. Diane began reading immediately. Within seconds, her expression changed. "This isn't a normal cemetery contract." Samuel moved beside her. "No, it isn't." Across the top appeared the words "Private Burial Rights Assignment," not an official Maple Grove form. Instead, it was a private agreement stating that Andrew Wallace possessed full authority to transfer burial plot 214B to Harold Ellison. Attached was a notarized affidavit claiming that I had voluntarily decided to be cremated. I stared at the sentence. "I never wanted to be cremated." Ruth looked horrified. "He told me," she swallowed. "He said you had changed your mind after your husband died." I slowly shook my head. "James and I chose those plots together. We wanted to rest beside each other. I would never have changed that." Ruth covered her face. "Oh, Lord. I buried my husband with a lie." "No," I said softly. "You buried him with love. Someone else supplied the lie." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I trusted him." "So did I." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Samuel continued examining the paperwork. "There are additional charges." He pointed farther down the invoice. "Transfer fee, administrative review, historic section preservation assessment, family release authorization, nearly $9,000 in extra fees." "I've never seen these before," Samuel said. "Because they don't exist." Diane reached for another sheet. "These fees were deposited into Andrew's company. Not Maple Grove, not the cemetery. Andrew had invented them. He charged you almost $9,000 for services that were completely fictional." Ruth stared blankly at the page. "I emptied Harold's savings account. He wanted that place beneath the maple tree. I thought—" Her voice disappeared. I reached across the table and gently held her hand. "You were honoring your husband. None of this is your fault." She squeezed my fingers. "I'll testify. I'll tell the judge everything." Diane nodded. "We'll need every detail." As they continued reviewing the contract, Samuel quietly stood. "I want to check something." He disappeared upstairs. About 20 minutes later, he returned carrying another file. "I found the internal processing records." He spread several printed emails across the table. One message immediately caught my attention. "From Andrew Wallace to Maple Grove Administration, subject future family consolidation." Samuel frowned. "I missed this before." He handed the email to Diane. She read silently, then looked at me. "Clara, I think you should read it yourself." My hands shook as I accepted the paper. The email read, "Following guardianship approval, I intend to consolidate the Wallace family section into a premium double estate configuration. Please advise regarding removal procedures for existing remains and timeline for relocation." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Removal procedures, existing remains, relocation. I read the message again and again. Then the meaning finally reached me. They were going to move James. No one answered. No one needed to. Andrew hadn't only sold my grave, he had already begun asking how to remove his father's body. I looked toward the basement ceiling, as though I could somehow see through the earth above us. James had worked his entire life. He had loved our family. He had trusted our son. And now, his own son wanted to dig him up for profit. Samuel spoke quietly. "The request was never approved. We told him court authorization would be required. But he asked." "Yes." My legs suddenly felt weak. I sat down without realizing it. Every terrible discovery during the past 3 days had hurt. But this was different. Selling my grave was greed. Moving James's body, that felt like betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined. Diane continued reading. There are more emails. Another message appeared. "If two adjoining historic plots become available simultaneously, estimated resale value exceeds $90,000. I closed my eyes. 2 adjoining plots. mine, and James's, together. Our final resting place had become nothing more than numbers on Andrew's spreadsheet. $90,000, a profit calculation. Nothing else. Ruth whispered through tears. I don't understand. How could someone do this to their own father? I didn't know. Perhaps I never would. Samuel carefully returned the emails to their folder. We'll preserve these. They establish intent, Diane nodded. They show this wasn't a single bad decision. This was a long-term financial plan. Exactly as we feared. The room remained quiet until my cell phone vibrated. A text message. From Lily. Grandma, please don't answer. Dad's looking for me. I found something else. My heart immediately began racing. A second message arrived. It's on Dad's laptop. A folder called Cemetery. There's a video. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Please don't tell anyone I told you, especially Dad. Then, silence. I stared at the screen. What is it? Diane asked. I handed her the phone. She read every message carefully. A video. Samuel frowned. What kind of video? We don't know. But if Andrew saved it, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Whatever existed inside that folder, Andrew had considered it important enough to keep, yet important enough to hide from everyone else. I immediately worried about Lily. If Andrew discovered she had been using his computer, would he erase everything? Would he punish her? Would she even be safe at home? Almost as though she had read my thoughts, Diane quietly said, We are not asking Lily to retrieve anything. It's too dangerous. I agree. But if the computer is seized later, she looked toward this growing stack of evidence. Every file could become part of the investigation. For the first time all afternoon, I felt something stronger than grief. Determination. Andrew believed every lie was hidden, every forged document buried, every stolen dollar forgotten. He had never imagined that ordinary people, a cemetery manager, a widow, a granddaughter, a lawyer, would each hold one piece of the truth. As we prepared to leave, Samuel locked the archive room behind us. The late afternoon sun filtered through the maple trees. I looked toward James's grave. The wooden marker bearing the Ellison name still stood beside him. Soon it would be removed, I hoped. Ruth walked beside me. I'm so sorry. So am I. I wish we'd met under different circumstances. So do I. She smiled sadly. Harold always said grief introduces strangers who become friends. I squeezed her hand. I think he was right. As Diane loaded boxes into her car, Samuel stopped beside me. I've already informed maintenance. No work will begin on either plot. Not without my written authorization. Thank you. He hesitated. I know tomorrow feels overwhelming. It does. But remember something. What? When people build a lie this large, they almost always leave behind more evidence than they realize. I nodded. He was right. Andrew had spent months planning every document, every forged signature, every conversation, every financial transfer. But greed has a habit of growing, and greedy people often make one mistake too many. Somewhere inside Andrew's hidden computer folder, another mistake was waiting to be found. I hardly slept Thursday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James's headstone standing alone beneath the maple tree, while strangers discussed relocation procedures, as if my husband were nothing more than another file in a cabinet. At 4:30 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I made coffee, watered the roses James had planted along the back fence, fed the birds that gathered outside my kitchen window every sunrise. I wanted 1 hour that still belonged to the life I recognized. Instead, my phone rang just after 7. Andrew. I stared at the screen until the call nearly ended before answering. Good morning, Mom. His voice sounded cheerful, far too cheerful. Good morning. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tonight. Tonight, just hours before the guardianship hearing. I don't know. Please. I've barely seen you this week. Megan's making your favorite pot roast. I understood immediately. I wanted to see me one last time before court, Perhaps to judge whether I suspected anything. Perhaps to convince himself everything remained under control. I'd like that, I answered. Great. 6 o'clock. We'll be waiting. As soon as I hung up, Diane called. I was hoping you'd accept. You expected he'd invite me. He wants reassurance. He'll study your reactions. So remember. I know. Act exactly the way I've always acted. Exactly. Do not confront him. Not yet. That evening, I parked outside Andrew's house just before 6. The front porch lights glowed warmly. Lily opened the door before I reached it. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual, too long. You okay? I whispered. She nodded, but her eyes told another story. Fear. Inside, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Megan had set the dining table with polished silverware. Candles flickered. Soft music played in the background. Anyone looking through the windows would have seen a happy American family sharing dinner. Appearances had become Andrew's greatest talent. Mom, he embraced me. His smile looked effortless. I'm glad you came. So am I. It was a lie. We sat together. For several minutes, conversation remained harmless. Weather, church, Lily's upcoming exams, neighborhood construction. Andrew poured wine. I know tomorrow feels stressful. I lifted my glass. It does. But remember, he smiled reassuringly, I'm only trying to help you. Those words once would have comforted me. Now they sounded rehearsed. Megan reached across the table. You've been carrying so much alone since James passed. I've managed. You shouldn't have to. Andrew nodded. Exactly. We've been discussing what life could look like after tomorrow. After tomorrow. Not if. After. He already believed victory was guaranteed. What do you mean? I asked quietly. Megan stood. I want to show you something. She returned carrying a glossy folder. Golden Meadows Senior Living. Again. Only this time additional paperwork rested inside. Floor plans, meal schedules, resident agreements, and a reservation form. They had already selected an apartment. I never asked you to do this. Andrew smiled patiently. We know. We wanted to remove the burden. There isn't any burden. He leaned forward. Mom, you've always taken care of everyone. It's our turn. The performance almost impressed me. If I hadn't seen forged signatures, if I hadn't held the fake physician's report, if I hadn't read the emails about digging up James, I might have believed him. Instead, I asked the question I had rehearsed all afternoon. What about your father? Andrew blinked. What about him? I visited his grave again yesterday. I've been thinking about him. So have I. I find comfort knowing I'll be buried beside him someday. For the first time that evening, Andrew hesitated. Barely. But I saw it. Then he smiled. You don't need to worry about that. Everything inside me screamed. He knew. He knew exactly what he had done. And yet he looked directly into my eyes and lied. I've made sure Dad's resting place will always be respected. Always. I forced myself to take another bite of dinner. Across the table, Lily lowered her eyes. She couldn't bear to watch her father speak. After dessert, Andrew excused himself to answer a business call upstairs. The moment he disappeared, Lily quietly stood. Grandma, I forgot something in my room. She looked at me. Can you help me? Megan barely glanced up from loading the dishwasher. Of course. The moment Lily closed her bedroom door, she locked it. Then she reached beneath her mattress. She removed a small flash drive. My heart started pounding. Lily. I copied it. What? The folder. She placed the flash drive into my hand. I didn't take everything. Just one file. What file? A recording. Dad saved it yesterday. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic. Did anyone see you? No. I erased the copy history. I almost laughed through my fear. 16 years old, and already protecting evidence better than adults. Lily, this was dangerous. I know. But Grandma, her eyes filled with tears. I heard Dad tell Mom. She couldn't finish. What did he say? He said after tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to stop them anymore. My chest tightened. What else? He said once the judge signs the papers, he'll finally be able to sell your house. I nodded slowly. I know. Her face fell. You know? Yes. She began crying. I'm so sorry. I wrapped my arms around her. This isn't your fault. It feels like it. No. You didn't create this. You helped uncover it. She wiped her eyes. Promise me you'll look at the flash drive. I will. And promise you won't tell Dad. I promise. Footsteps echoed upstairs. Andrew. Lily quickly unlocked her bedroom door. By the time he reached the hallway, she was pretending to organize school books. On the drive home, I didn't insert the flash drive into my computer. Diane had warned me, never examine evidence alone. Instead, I drove directly to her office. She was still waiting. Together, we inserted the drive into an isolated laptop used for legal investigations. Only one audio file appeared. No title, just a date. Yesterday. Diane pressed play. Andrew's voice filled the room. Once the guardianship's approved. A chair scraped across the floor. Then Megan answered. She'll never get control back. Andrew laughed softly. We'll list the house within a week. What about the cemetery? Already handled. And your father? A long pause. Then Andrew replied. The cemetery already told me how relocation works. We'll combine both plots. Double lots sell faster. My stomach turned. The conversation continued. Then Megan spoke again. What if Clara starts asking questions? Andrew answered without hesitation. She can't prove anything. And even if she tries, everyone already thinks she's confused. Silence filled Diane's office after the recording ended. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, because for the first time, we possessed Andrew's own words, not forged documents, not assumptions, not suspicious circumstances, his own voice, his own plan, his own confession. Diane carefully removed the flash drive. This changes everything. I looked at the tiny device resting in her palm. No, I whispered. It changes nothing. She frowned. What do you mean? My son still made every choice. I just finally heard him admit it. Tomorrow morning, the judge would hear him tell a very different story. But tonight, for the first time since James died, I no longer feared Andrew's lies. Because now, the truth had found its own voice. By 8:30 Friday morning, the courthouse hallway was already crowded. Families waited on wooden benches. Attorneys hurried past carrying thick binders. A bailiff called names one after another, while people whispered nervously outside the courtroom doors. I had visited this courthouse only twice before in my life. Once to finalize James's adoption after his stepfather legally became his father. The second time to settle James's estate after his death. Both occasions had been emotional. Neither compared to this. Today, I wasn't defending property. I was defending my right to remain myself. Diane adjusted the stack of folders in her arms. Remember. I know. Answer only what's asked. Don't react emotionally. And let the evidence speak. I nodded. Across the hallway, Andrew appeared with Megan. He wore a navy suit that James had once bought him for his first real estate awards banquet. Seeing him wear his father's gift, while trying to erase his father's final resting place, made my stomach tighten. When our eyes met, he smiled. The same practiced smile he had worn during dinner. Morning, Mom. Good morning. You okay? I'm fine. He looked relieved. He still believed I knew almost nothing. Megan stepped forward and embraced me. I'm praying everything goes smoothly today. I almost stepped backward. Instead, I simply thanked her. The courtroom doors opened. Case number 24G1 in 18. In the matter of the proposed temporary guardianship of Clara Wallace. Everyone entered. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Judge Margaret Holloway reviewed the file silently for several moments before speaking. Counsel for the petitioner. Andrew's attorney stood. Your Honor. We seek temporary emergency guardianship based upon documented evidence that Mrs. Wallace is experiencing cognitive decline, placing both her finances and personal safety at risk. He spoke smoothly, professionally, almost compassionately. If I had not been living this nightmare myself, I might have believed him. He called Andrew first. My son walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth. Then he began lying. My father passed away 3 years ago. Since then, my mother's memory has steadily declined. He lowered his eyes. There have been many difficult moments. He described forgotten appointments, lost house keys, supposedly unpaid utility bills, stories about leaving the stove on, driving to the wrong grocery store. Each story sounded believable, because each contained tiny pieces of reality wrapped inside enormous lies. Yes, I had once misplaced my keys. Everyone does. Yes. I once paid the electric bill 2 days late after James died. Grief does that. Andrew simply gathered ordinary human moments and transformed them into evidence of incompetence. When his attorney asked why he sought guardianship, Andrew's voice softened. I love my mother. I don't want strangers taking advantage of her. The irony nearly took my breath away. Next came Megan. She spoke gently, respectfully. She even cried. I think Clara believes she's doing better than she really is. I've watched her become confused. Sometimes she repeats the same questions. Sometimes she forgets conversations entirely. The judge listened carefully. Every sentence sounded reasonable, measured, concerned. Then Dr. Preston Hale testified. To my surprise, he appeared uncomfortable. Diane noticed it too. The doctor adjusted his glasses repeatedly. Doctor, Andrew's attorney began. Did you evaluate Mrs. Wallace? Yes. What were your observations? I observed possible concerns requiring additional evaluation. He carefully emphasized the word possible, not confirmed, possible. And based upon family reports, I recommended assistance. The attorney smiled confidently. No further questions. Diane stood. Dr. Hale. Good morning. Good morning. You testified that you recommended assistance. Correct. Did you diagnose dementia? No. Alzheimer's disease? No. Any cognitive disorder whatsoever? No. She held up his report. So your letter was not a declaration of incapacity? No. It was simply a recommendation for further testing? Yes. Did you perform standardized cognitive examinations? No. Memory testing? No. Executive function testing? No. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Doctor. Who told you Mrs. Wallace wandered at night? Her family. Who told you she repeatedly left the stove on? Her family. Who told you she became lost while driving? Her family. So every factual statement suggesting cognitive decline came from Andrew and Megan Wallace. Yes. Diane nodded. No further questions. Andrew looked less comfortable now. Next. Diane called Dr. Eleanor Matthews. She explained every test she had performed, the duration, the scoring, the clinical standards. Finally, she read her conclusion. Mrs. Wallace demonstrates intact judgment, excellent reasoning, preserved memory, and full capacity to independently manage financial, legal, and personal decisions. The judge made several notes. Andrew avoided looking at me. Then Samuel Carter testified. He described the forged transfer, the cemetery's original policies, the archive records, the attempted burial, the emails requesting relocation of James's remains. The courtroom became completely silent. Andrew's attorney objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed much of the testimony. Finally, Ruth Ellison spoke. Her grief filled the courtroom. My husband died believing I'd honored his final wish. She looked directly at Andrew. I trusted him. He told me Clara Wallace had chosen cremation. He charged me thousands of dollars in fake cemetery fees. He lied. Several jurors weren't present. It was not a jury trial, but even the court staff seemed visibly affected. By noon, For the first time, I believed we might actually win. Then Andrew's attorney stood again. Your Honor, I have one final exhibit. He walked toward the evidence table carrying a flash drive. My heart skipped. Diane looked puzzled. The recording began. My own voice filled the courtroom. I suppose someday Andrew will handle everything. A pause. Then another sentence. Maybe even the cemetery. Another pause. I trust him completely. I froze. It was my voice. My words. Yet, something felt wrong. The recording continued. I don't need to make decisions anymore. Andrew knows what's best. Gasps echoed quietly around the room. The judge looked toward Diane. Andrew's attorney smiled. The petitioner submits this recording as evidence that Mrs. Wallace voluntarily expressed her desire for her son to assume responsibility for all major life decisions. I listened carefully. Again and again. Something wasn't right. The tone changed between sentences. The breathing changed. The room echoed differently. Then suddenly, I remembered. The first sentence had come from a conversation after James's funeral. I had said Andrew handled paperwork while I was grieving. The second sentence had been spoken months later while discussing who would water my flowers during vacation. The final sentence, I had never spoken at all. No, not like that. I closed my eyes. There, behind my voice, a grandfather clock chimed 6 times, but only a few seconds later, I heard the familiar introduction music from my favorite noon radio program. Those sounds could never exist in the same continuous recording. I leaned toward Diane. It's edited. She stared at me. What? The clock. What clock? Our grandfather clock rings every evening at 6. But immediately afterward, they inserted audio recorded at lunchtime. Diane listens again. Her expression changed instantly. She stood. Your Honor, we request an immediate pause. We believe this recording has been digitally manipulated. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Holloway looked toward both attorneys. On what basis? Diane answered calmly. Because Mrs. Wallace recognized sounds from 2 different times of day inside what is presented as one uninterrupted conversation. For the first time that entire morning, Andrew's confident expression disappeared. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Judge Holloway removed her glasses and looked from Diane to Andrew's attorney. Counsel, she said calmly, approach. Both attorneys walked to the bench while the white noise machine hummed softly, preventing the audience from hearing the discussion. I sat perfectly still. Andrew stared at the table in front of him. For the first time since the hearing began, he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anyone. After several minutes, the judge nodded. The attorneys returned to their tables. Judge Holloway addressed the courtroom. Given the challenge to the authenticity of the recording, this court will hear additional testimony before determining the weight to assign this evidence. Diane stood immediately. Your Honor, the respondent calls Dr. Victor Lang. A man in his early 50s walked to the witness stand. He introduced himself as a forensic audio specialist who had examined recordings for state and federal courts for more than 20 years. He accepted a pair of headphones from the bailiff. The disputed recording was played again. Every person in the courtroom listened in complete silence. When it ended, Dr. Lang removed the headphones. What is your preliminary opinion? Diane asked. He answered carefully. I have not performed a complete laboratory examination. However, he paused. I immediately noticed several discontinuities. Andrew's attorney stood. Objection. The witness is speculating. Judge Holloway shook her head. Overruled. He may explain the basis for his observation, Dr. Lang continued. There are abrupt changes in background acoustics. The ambient room noise shifts. The reverberation characteristics differ. And, he glanced toward me. The respondent was correct. There are environmental sounds inconsistent with a continuous recording. He pointed toward the speaker. A grandfather clock striking 6. Followed seconds later by what appears to be a midday radio broadcast. Those events cannot logically occur within one uninterrupted conversation. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Andrew's attorney quickly rose. Could those sounds simply come from a television? Dr. Lang calmly shook his head. The frequency signatures suggest separate recordings. I also detected abrupt waveform transitions. In plain English, he looked toward the judge. Someone appears to have assembled this recording from multiple conversations. The judge slowly nodded. Diane smiled slightly. One more question. Can a person's real voice be rearranged to create sentences they never actually spoke? Yes. Very easily. No further questions. Andrew's attorney attempted to challenge the testimony, but gained little ground. The damage had already been done. The recording Andrew believed would end the case had become evidence against him. Then Diane surprised everyone. Your Honor, the respondent calls Lily Wallace. My heart stopped. I turned immediately. Lily had been sitting quietly in the last row beside a court-appointed youth advocate. She looked terrified. Andrew's head snapped around. Lily. His voice echoed through the courtroom. She avoided looking at him. Slowly she walked toward the witness stand. She looked so young sitting in the large wooden chair. Judge Holloway softened her voice. Take your time. Lily raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, then sat quietly for several seconds before Diane spoke. Lily, do you love your grandmother? Yes. Do you love your father? Fresh tears filled her eyes. Yes. Very much. Then I understand this is difficult. She nodded silently. Diane continued gently. Did you ever see your father working with audio recordings? Lily closed her eyes briefly. Yes. When? The night before the hearing. What was he doing? He had headphones on. There were little pieces of sound on the computer screen. He kept moving them around. Andrew suddenly stood. Objection. She's a child. She doesn't understand audio software. Judge Holloway looked at him sharply. Sit down, Mr. Wallace. He slowly obeyed. Diane continued. Did your mother say anything? Lily hesitated, then whispered. She told Dad. Use shorter pieces. That way nobody will notice. Several people in the gallery gasped. Andrew buried his face in his hands. Diane remained calm. Lily, did you hear your parents discuss your grandmother's house? Yes. What did they say? They said, she struggled to breathe. After the judge signed the guardianship papers, they could finally sell Grandma's house. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of the testimony, because every sentence forced Lily to choose between honesty and loyalty to her parents. No child should ever face that choice. Diane asked one final question. Did you provide a copy of any recording to your grandmother? Yes. Why? Lily finally looked directly at me. Because Grandma wasn't confused. Everyone kept saying she was. But she remembered my birthday. She helped me with algebra. She always knew where she put things. Her voice cracked. I knew they were lying. Silence. Complete silence. Judge Holloway herself appeared moved. When Lily stepped down, I wanted nothing more than to hug her. Instead, I remained seated. The hearing wasn't over. Andrew's attorney made one final attempt. He argued Lily had misunderstood conversations. That family stress created confusion. That business problems explained financial decisions. Then Diane stood once more. Your Honor, we have one final exhibit he had copied from Andrew's computer. The room filled with Andrew's unmistakable voice. Once the guardianship's approved, she'll never get control back. We'll sell the house. The cemetery already told me how relocation works. No editing, no interruptions. No missing context. Just Andrew speaking freely. The recording ended. No one moved. Judge Holloway looked directly at Andrew. Do you deny making these statements? Andrew slowly stood. His face had become pale. He glanced toward Megan. She stared straight ahead. I was under enormous financial pressure. The courtroom remained silent. I never meant. His voice failed. I never meant for things to go this far. Judge Holloway interrupted. That was not my question. Do you deny making those statements? A long pause followed. Finally, no. One word. Barely audible. But enough. Judge Holloway closed the file before her. This court finds no credible evidence that Clara Wallace lacks legal capacity. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. I closed my eyes. The words washed over me like rain after years of drought. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, the testimony presented today raises substantial concerns regarding possible financial exploitation, forgery, fraud, and abuse of a vulnerable adult. She turned toward the clerk. I am referring this matter immediately to the Commonwealth's attorney and appropriate law enforcement agencies. Andrew lowered his head. Megan reached for his hand. He pulled away. Then came the final surprise. A detective who had been quietly observing from the back of the courtroom approached Diane. She handed him copies of the forged documents, the cemetery records, and the audio evidence. The detective nodded. "We'll begin immediately." As everyone slowly stood to leave, Andrew looked at me for the first time all day. His eyes searched mine desperately. "Mom." The word sounded small, broken, almost childlike. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy who once asked me to check under his bed for monsters. Then I remembered the forged signatures, James's grave, the fake physician's letter, Lily's tears, Ruth's husband, my house, my life. The little boy was gone. Standing before me was a grown man facing the consequences of choices he had made one by one. And for the first time, I did not step forward to rescue him. The courthouse emptied slowly. Reporters had not gathered outside because the hearing was never expected to become news. To everyone else, it had been a routine guardianship petition. To me, it had been the day I almost lost my life without dying. Andrew remained seated long after the judge left the bench. Megan stood beside him, whispering urgently, but he barely seemed to hear her. Two detectives were already speaking with their supervisor near the courtroom doors, reviewing copies of the documents Diane had provided. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after carrying heartbreak for far too long. "Clara." Diane touched my elbow gently. "It's time." I knew exactly what she meant. For days, the sealed envelope James had left behind had remained locked in her fireproof cabinet. According to his written instructions, it could only be opened after there was objective evidence that someone had attempted to defraud or coerce me. Judge Holloway's ruling had satisfied that condition. We drove directly to Diane's office. No one spoke during the 20-minute drive. Rain clouds had disappeared, leaving Richmond washed clean beneath a bright afternoon sky. James used to say storms never lasted forever. He believed every hard season eventually revealed what had been hidden. Today, I prayed he had been right. Once inside her conference room, Diane placed the large envelope on the polished oak table. The wax seal remained perfectly intact. My husband had sealed it 5 years earlier, before any of this had happened, before he became sick, before he suffered the stroke that stole him from me. He had somehow imagined that one day I might need his voice after he was gone. "I'll open it in front of you," Diane said softly. I nodded. Using a small letter opener, she carefully lifted the seal without damaging the paper. Inside were several folded documents and one handwritten letter. My breath caught the moment I recognized James's handwriting. Diane slid the letter toward me. "I think this belongs to you." My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. The first line blurred through my tears. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, something has happened that I prayed never would. I hope I'm wrong about my fears, but if Diane has decided to open this letter, then someone is trying to take from you what belongs to you, not just your property, but your peace." I paused. Even after death. He sounded exactly like himself. I continued reading. "You have always believed the best about people. That is one of the reasons I fell in love with you, but it is also why I worried that someday someone might mistake your kindness for weakness. Please remember this. Being loving does not require being defenseless. Being forgiving does not require surrendering your dignity. If anyone pressures you to sign papers you don't understand or convinces others that your voice no longer matters, I want you to fight. Fight not because of the money. Fight because your life belongs to you. I wiped away fresh tears. Diane quietly looked away, giving me privacy. The next paragraph was harder to read. I love our son more than words can say. But I have watched him hide financial mistakes since he was a teenager. He is not evil. He is frightened of failure. Frightened people sometimes convince themselves that wrong choices are temporary. If Andrew ever reaches the point where he believes taking from you is the only way to save himself, promise me you will stop him, not to punish him, to save what remains of his character. My chest tightened. James hadn't predicted every detail. He hadn't foreseen forged signatures or stolen graves, but he had understood our son better than I ever had. I finished the final page. If none of this ever happens, burn this letter and laugh at me for worrying too much. But if it does, know this with absolute certainty. You are the greatest blessing of my life. No one, not even someone we love, has the right to convince you otherwise. Forever yours, James. I couldn't speak. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was my quiet crying. Then Diane reached for the remaining documents. There are legal instructions as well. She carefully separated them into several folders. The first document amended our family trust. James had transferred our home, our remaining investments, and our cemetery rights into a revocable trust several years before his death. I frowned. I don't remember signing this. You did, Diane said gently. It was part of your estate update after Andrew started his development company. She pointed toward a highlighted section. James had included a protective clause. It stated that I would remain the sole lifetime beneficiary and trustee while mentally competent. Andrew would inherit only after my death. But there was another paragraph, one I had never noticed before. Diane read it aloud. If any beneficiary directly or indirectly attempts to obtain trust assets through fraud, forgery, coercion, false claims of incapacity, financial exploitation, or abuse of the surviving spouse, she looked up. That beneficiary shall immediately forfeit all inheritance rights under this trust. I stared at her. What happens instead? She turned the page. The forfeited share transfers to the Wallace Educational Trust for the benefit of Lily Wallace. Silence filled the room. Andrew hadn't merely risked losing my trust. He had legally erased himself from his father's inheritance by trying to steal everything. He had inherited nothing. Diane continued reviewing the documents. James had anticipated challenges to the cemetery rights as well. He had included certified copies of the original purchase agreement, detailed notes explaining why those adjoining plots held deep emotional significance, and instructions that neither plot should ever be sold separately during my lifetime. He really thought of everything, I whispered. He tried, Diane replied. A knock interrupted us. The receptionist opened the door slightly. Andrew Wallace is here. Neither of us had expected that. Diane looked at me. You don't have to see him. I thought about refusing. Then I remembered James's words. Stop him. Not to punish him. To save what remains of his character. I'll see him. Andrew entered slowly. He no longer looked like the confident businessman from the courtroom. His tie was loosened. His shoulders slumped. His eyes were bloodshot. He stopped several feet away from the table. Mom. I waited. I never wanted this. The words hung heavily in the room. No, I asked quietly. He shook his head. My project failed. I kept thinking one more deal would fix everything. Then investors wanted their money. Banks started calling. I panicked. You panicked, I repeated. So you sold my grave. He closed his eyes. I thought I could buy it back before you'd ever know. And your father's grave. His face crumpled. There wasn't supposed to be another option. You asked how to move him. I know. You forged my signature. I know. You tried to convince the judge I had lost my mind. Fresh tears rolled down his face. I know. I looked at the letter still lying open on the table, then back at my son. If this had only been about money, I might have understood desperation. But Andrew, I struggled to keep my voice steady. You stood beside your father's grave and planned to sell the promise we made to each other. He covered his face. I don't know how I became this person. Neither did I. But one thing had become painfully clear. The consequences James had prepared years earlier were no longer theoretical. They were real. And before Andrew left Diane's office that afternoon, he would learn that his father had already written the final chapter of his inheritance. 3 days later, I returned to Maple Grove Memorial Park. The sky was brilliantly blue, the kind of clear autumn morning James always loved. Sunlight filtered through the branches of the old maple tree, scattering red and gold leaves across the stone pathway. For the first time since this nightmare began, I walked toward James's grave without fear. Today was the cemetery board's emergency review meeting. The purpose was simple: determine whether the transfer of my burial plot would be permanently voided. But everyone knew it represented something much larger. It was the final public reckoning. Samuel greeted me outside the administration building. They're all here. Inside the conference room sat the 5 members of the cemetery board. Diane organized several binders on one side of the table. Across from her sat Ruth Ellison. She smiled gently when she saw me. How are you today? Better. And you? She nodded. I've made peace with waiting. I want Harold buried somewhere honest, not somewhere built on another family's heartbreak. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Thank you. The meeting began promptly at 10. Samuel summarized everything that had happened: the forged transfer documents, the fraudulent power of attorney, the pending criminal investigation, the attempted guardianship, the cemetery emails. When he finished the board, Chairman looked toward Ruth. Mrs. Ellison, would you like to make a statement? She stood slowly. My husband believed integrity mattered more than comfort. If he knew this burial plot had been obtained through lies, he would never want to remain there. Her voice trembled. I respectfully ask the board to restore Mrs. Wallace's rights. And please, she smiled sadly, help me find another peaceful place for Harold. Several board members nodded quietly. Then the conference room door opened. Andrew entered. Megan followed close behind. Neither had expected to see so many people. Andrew looked exhausted. His suit hung loosely on his shoulders. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. Megan still attempted to appear confident, but I noticed her hands shaking as she sat. The chairman spoke calmly. Mr. Wallace, you requested permission to address the board. Andrew nodded. He stood. For several seconds he simply stared at the floor. Finally he spoke. I know I've done terrible things. I can't defend them. I only ask. He looked toward me. That my mother withdraw the criminal complaint. Silence. He continued. If this becomes public, my career is over. My life is over. I listened without interrupting. Not once did he mention my life. Not once did he mention James. Only his own future. Then Megan stood unexpectedly. I need to say something. Andrew looked surprised. So do I. She faced the board. This wasn't entirely Andrew's idea. I frowned. What was she doing? She took a deep breath. I encouraged him. I told him temporary guardianship would solve everything. I believed we could fix the finances afterward. Andrew stared at her. Megan. She ignored him. I never wanted to hurt Clara. But once we'd started, every lie required another lie. For a brief moment, I almost believed she was finally accepting responsibility. Then Samuel quietly placed several printed photographs on the table. What are these? The chairman asked. Security camera images, Samuel answered. Taken the day the forged cemetery documents were delivered. Everyone looked closely. There was Megan, standing at Maple Grove's reception desk, holding the folder herself, talking with the administrative assistant, pointing toward the transfer paperwork. Not Andrew. Megan. Samuel placed another document beside the photographs. A visitor log, signed by Megan Wallace, time-stamped, the same morning. She had personally delivered the fraudulent paperwork. Megan slowly sat back down. No one spoke. Then Samuel produced one final exhibit. We also recovered voicemail records. He pressed play. Megan's voice filled the conference room. Andrew, don't forget to ask them about moving your father's remains. If both plots become available, you'll get much more money. The recording ended. Andrew slowly closed his eyes. The room remained silent. Megan whispered, I didn't think they'd ever find that. The chairman folded his hands. It appears responsibility extends beyond one individual. Diane stood. I believe the evidence now speaks for itself. She reviewed the chronology carefully. The forged signatures, the fake physician's statement, the fraudulent transfer, the invented fees, the attempted relocation, the guardianship petition, the financial exploitation. Every piece fit together. No speculation remained, only facts. When she finished, the chairman turned toward Andrew one final time. Is there anything else you wish to say? Andrew stood again. This time his voice sounded completely different. No excuses, no performance. My father worked every weekend to buy those plots. I remember helping him plant flowers there. I remember promising I'd always take care of Mom. He swallowed hard. Somewhere, I stopped seeing people. I only saw problems. Debt. Payments. Deadlines. I convinced myself I could fix everything later. His eyes met mine. But by then, I'd already become someone Dad wouldn't recognize. Fresh tears rolled down his face. For the first time, he wasn't asking for rescue, only admitting the truth. I stood slowly. Everyone looked toward me. I walked to the window overlooking the cemetery. James's headstone stood beneath the maple tree exactly where it belonged. The empty space beside it waited quietly, just as it had for 23 years. Then I turned toward my son. You know what hurts the most? He lowered his head. I thought it was losing my grave. It wasn't. I thought it was the forged signatures. It wasn't. My voice remained calm. The worst part was realizing that in your heart, you had already buried me. Andrew began crying openly. You sold the place where I hoped to rest beside your father. But long before that, you stopped seeing me as your mother. You saw me as an obstacle. No one moved. No one interrupted. I still love you. I said the words slowly. I always will. But love cannot erase consequences. If I protect you from what you've done, then I become part of the lie. Andrew nodded silently. I know. At that moment, two detectives entered the room carrying official documents. They spoke quietly with the chairman before approaching Andrew and Megan. We need both of you to come with us. The charges included forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly adult, fraud, and related offenses. Neither resisted. As Andrew walked past me, he stopped. I'm sorry, Mom. Not the polished apology of someone trying to avoid punishment, just 3 quiet words. I looked into his eyes. I hope someday those words become the beginning of who you are. He nodded once, then left. The room remained silent until the cemetery chairman finally spoke. By unanimous vote, the transfer of burial plot 214B is permanently void. The burial rights are fully restored to Mrs. Clara Wallace. He turned toward Ruth. The cemetery will provide your family an equivalent historic burial site at no additional cost. Ruth smiled through tears. Harold would have liked that. When the meeting ended, I walked alone to James's grave. The temporary wooden marker bearing another family's name had already been removed. Only green grass remained. I knelt beside the headstone. I kept my promise. The breeze stirred the maple leaves above me. I couldn't save our son from his choices, but I saved what we built together. For the first time since James died, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, not relief. Peace. The quiet kind that comes only after truth finally stands where lies once lived. 6 months passed before the legal process finally came to an end. Justice, I discovered, moves much more slowly than betrayal. After everything that had happened, I expected to feel lighter once the court cases were over. Instead, I learned that winning a legal battle does not instantly heal a broken heart. Some mornings I still woke expecting James to be making coffee in the kitchen. Some afternoons I caught myself reaching for the telephone wanting to tell him about my day. Then I would remember. The silence answered instead. The criminal proceedings against Andrew and Megan concluded in early spring. Neither case went to a full jury trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the fraudulent power of attorney, the fake cemetery transfer, the manipulated audio recordings, the financial records, the testimony from Samuel, Ruth, Lily, and the doctors. Most damaging of all, Andrew's own recorded words. His attorney eventually negotiated a plea agreement. Andrew pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly adult, and fraud involving legal documents. The judge spoke directly to him before announcing the sentence. You did not simply steal money. You attempted to steal another person's identity. You attempted to convince the legal system that your own mother no longer possessed the right to direct her own life. That betrayal carries consequences beyond financial loss. Andrew received a suspended prison sentence conditioned upon strict compliance with probation, restitution, community service, and mandatory financial counseling. He permanently lost his real estate license. His development company dissolved within weeks. Everything he had tried so desperately to protect disappeared anyway. Megan's case unfolded differently. Initially, she insisted she had merely followed her husband's instructions. That defense lasted less than 2 days. The surveillance footage from Maple Grove, the visitor logs, the forged notary documents, the voicemail about relocating James's remains. Every piece of evidence contradicted her story. Eventually, she also accepted responsibility through a negotiated plea. Her notary commission was permanently revoked. Professional disciplinary boards prohibited her from working in several financial positions requiring fiduciary trust. The marriage did not survive. According to their attorneys, Andrew and Megan separated shortly after the criminal cases concluded. Each blamed the other. Neither accepted full responsibility. Some relationships collapse long before divorce papers are signed. Theirs had ended the moment greed became more important than honesty. Recovering my finances proved equally complicated. The bank permanently canceled the fraudulent home equity loan after completing its investigation. Insurance covering financial fraud reimbursed part of my losses. Court-ordered restitution required Andrew and Megan to repay additional amounts over time. Not every dollar returned immediately. Some never would. But Diane reminded me of something important. You didn't lose your home. You didn't lose your independence. And you didn't lose your voice. She was right. Those victories mattered more than numbers printed on a bank statement. The trust James created remained intact. Because Andrew had violated the forfeiture clause, his inheritance legally transferred into the educational trust established for Lily. When Diane explained the final accounting, I cried again. Not because Andrew had lost his inheritance, because James had somehow continued protecting our granddaughter even after his death. Lily moved temporarily to live with her Aunt Rebecca, while family court determined longer-term arrangements. The transition was difficult. She loved both of her parents despite everything that had happened. Children often love imperfect parents with extraordinary loyalty. I visited her nearly every weekend. Sometimes we baked cookies. Sometimes we watched old movies James loved. Sometimes we simply sat together without talking. One afternoon, she finally asked the question I knew had been waiting inside her heart. Grandma, do you hate Dad? I looked at her carefully. No. I hate what he chose. There's a difference. She nodded slowly. I still love him. I know. Is that wrong? I reached across the table and held her hands. No. Loving someone doesn't mean pretending they didn't hurt people. It simply means your heart hasn't forgotten who they once were. She smiled sadly. I hope he becomes that person again. So do I. Therapy helped her enormously. She slowly stopped believing that somehow she had caused the family to fall apart. Children often blame themselves for things adults create. I reminded her constantly that telling the truth had saved me. You didn't destroy this family. The lies did. Life gradually found a new rhythm. Sunday mornings returned to church. Tuesday afternoons returned to volunteering at the public library. The roses behind my house bloomed again. Neighbors stopped looking at me with pity and began treating me like Clara instead of that poor woman from the courthouse. Healing arrived quietly, not all at once, one ordinary day at a time. About 4 months after sentencing, my mailbox contained an unfamiliar envelope. The handwriting belonged to Andrew. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Then I carried it inside. The letter contained no requests, no excuses, no arguments, only an apology. He admitted he had blamed everyone except himself for years. He described attending financial counseling alongside men who had also destroyed families through pride and deception. He wrote that for the first time he understood the difference between regret and accountability. Regret feels terrible. Accountability changes behavior. At the end, he asked only one question: would you ever consider speaking with me again? I folded the letter carefully, then placed it inside my desk. I did not answer immediately. Forgiveness cannot be rushed simply because someone asks for it. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived, then another. Each one accepted more responsibility than the last. None demanded reconciliation. Diane asked whether I planned to respond. I don't know. She smiled gently. You don't have to decide today. She was right. Some wounds require patience. Eventually, I wrote a short reply. Only 3 sentences. I am glad you are telling the truth. Continue proving it with your actions. Perhaps someday we will talk. Months later, we met for the first time at a supervised family counseling session. He looked older. Not physically, emotionally. There are some mistakes that age a person far more quickly than time. He apologized again, this time without expecting immediate forgiveness. I appreciated that. Before leaving, he quietly asked, "Do you think Dad would ever forgive me?" I thought about James, about his letter, about the man who believed people should be held accountable because accountability offered the only real path toward becoming better. Finally, I answered, I think your father would expect you to spend the rest of your life becoming someone who no longer needs forgiveness for the same mistake. Andrew nodded silently. That was enough. As I drove home that evening, I realized something unexpected. Justice had not erased my pain. Justice had simply created enough safety for healing to begin. And sometimes, that is the greatest gift justice can give. 1 year later, I walked through the gates of Maple Grove Memorial Park, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Lily walked beside me. She had grown taller during the past year. Her shoulders seemed stronger now, and the uncertainty that once clouded her eyes had slowly been replaced by quiet confidence. She would graduate from high school in just a few weeks. Grandma, yes. I still like coming here. So do I. It doesn't feel sad anymore. I smiled. I don't think your grandfather ever wanted it to. The old maple tree looked magnificent in the spring sunlight. Fresh green leaves rustled gently overhead, replacing the brilliant reds and golds that had covered the cemetery during the darkest weeks of my life. James's headstone stood exactly where it always had, beside it. My empty bare plot remained untouched. Not because I wished to think about death, because seeing it there reminded me that my future still belonged to me. A new wooden bench had been installed beneath the maple tree. Samuel had arranged it several months earlier after the cemetery board unanimously approved a small memorial improvement project. A simple bronze plaque rested on its back. In honor of James and Clara Wallace, love should never be separated by greed. I traced the engraved words with my fingertips. They chose the inscription together, Samuel said as he approached. He was carrying a flat package wrapped in brown paper. I thought today would be the right time. What is it? He handed it to me. Inside was a professionally restored copy of the old photograph from the cemetery archives. James and I stood beneath this very maple tree more than 20 years earlier. We were both covered in mud after helping rebuild the cemetery following the flood. Our smiles looked effortless, hopeful, completely unaware of the trials still waiting for us. I had the original restored, Samuel said. My father would have wanted you to have it. Tears filled my eyes once again. Thank you. No, he smiled warmly. Thank you. If you and James hadn't volunteered all those years ago. My father often said Maple Grove might never have recovered. Some kindnesses continue growing long after the people who planted them are gone. That thought stayed with me. A few minutes later, another familiar face appeared. Ruth Ellison. She carried fresh flowers as well. Harold had been laid to rest beneath another maple tree several hundred yards away. The cemetery had provided a beautiful location overlooking the creek. I visited Harold first, she said. Then I thought I'd stop by. She hugged me. Over the past year, we had become unlikely friends. Every month we met for coffee. Sometimes we talked about our husbands, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing important at all. Pain had introduced us. Friendship remained after the pain began to heal. Lily smiled. Mrs. Ellison. You can call me Ruth. I've told you that 100 times. Lily laughed. I know. Together we sat on the bench beneath the tree. For a long while no one spoke. Silence no longer frightened me. It had become peaceful. Eventually Samuel cleared his throat. The community center approved the program. I looked at him. Already? He nodded. Our idea had begun almost accidentally. After everything that happened, Diane suggested we organize free workshops, teaching older adults how to protect themselves from financial exploitation, power of attorney, trust documents, bank fraud, property records, burial rights, the things I once believed only lawyers needed to understand. Now I knew every family should discuss them openly. Samuel volunteered Maple Grove's meeting hall. Diane agreed to teach legal topics. I offered to speak about my own experience. The first seminar attracted only 14 people. The second attracted 40. By the sixth meeting, every chair in the room was filled. People stayed afterward asking questions, sharing stories, warning one another about scams. My greatest heartbreak had unexpectedly become someone else's protection. Lily looked at me proudly. I've decided something. What? I changed my college application. You did? She nodded. I want to study social work. I smiled. I thought you wanted business. I did. Not anymore. She looked toward James's grave. I want to help families before things become this broken. I reached over and hugged her. Your grandfather would be proud. So am I. Several months earlier, the educational trust James created officially became hers. She refused to treat it as a reward. Instead, she called it a responsibility. Sometimes wisdom grows from the hardest places. As the afternoon sunlight shifted across the grass, my thoughts drifted toward Andrew. We had continued writing letters, slowly, carefully, months apart. Eventually, we met several more times during counseling. The conversations were never easy. Trust does not return because someone apologizes. Trust returns because someone consistently chooses honesty over time. Andrew had found work with a nonprofit housing organization performing maintenance rather than managing money. He accepted every restriction placed upon him. He continued paying restitution. He never again asked me to forget what had happened. Instead, he simply kept trying to become someone different. That mattered. Would everything ever return to what it had once been? No. Some bridges once burned are rebuilt differently, perhaps stronger, perhaps smaller, but never identical. As we prepared to leave, I placed the lilies beside James's headstone. I'll see you next week, I whispered. Then I looked at the empty space beside him. For an entire year, I had avoided thinking about my own burial plot. Today, I finally understood something. That place no longer represented death. It represented choice. It represented dignity. It represented the promise that no one, not fear, not greed, not even someone I loved deeply, would ever again decide my future without my voice. I turned toward Lily. Ready. She slipped her arm through mine. Always. As we walked toward the cemetery gates, I looked back one last time. The maple tree swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. James's headstone stood peacefully beneath it. And beside him, the place he had saved for me remained exactly where it belonged. My son tried to sell the ground where I planned to rest after my life was over. Instead, he forced me to fight for the life I was still living. That fight taught me something I will never forget. Growing older does not mean surrendering your independence. Love does not require surrendering your judgment. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, can exist without giving someone permission to hurt you again. If my story leaves you with anything today, I hope it's this. Protect your voice. Protect your dignity. Protect the promises that truly matter. Because the greatest inheritance we leave behind is never money or property. It is the courage to stand for what is right, even when the person standing against you is someone you once carried in your own arms. After everything that happened, I realized that the greatest loss is not money, property, or even a place prepared for our final rest. The greatest loss happens when we allow fear, guilt, or misplaced love to silence our own voice. Growing older should never mean giving up the right to make our own choices, protect our own dignity, or be treated with respect. Love is one of life's greatest gifts, but real love is never built on control, manipulation, or deception. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves, and even for the people who have hurt us, is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Accountability is not cruelty. In many cases, it is the only path that leaves room for genuine change. This journey also reminded me that trust should never replace wisdom. Keep copies of your important documents. Ask questions even when the answers make others uncomfortable. If something feels wrong, do not ignore that feeling, simply because the person standing in front of you is family. Your instincts deserve to be heard. Your life, your home, your memories, and your future are worth protecting. Most importantly, never believe that your age determines your value. Every wrinkle tells a story. Every year carries experience that no one can take away unless you surrender it yourself. You are not a burden because you need help. You are not weak because you ask for advice. And you are never too old to stand up for yourself when something is wrong. Strength does not always look like fighting. Sometimes strength is quietly saying, "No more," and refusing to let anyone write the ending of your story for you. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted, or have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you loved? Share your thoughts and your story in the comments. I read them, and your words may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If you believe stories like this, remind us to value family, protect our dignity, and never lose our voice. Please consider subscribing to the channel and joining us for more heartfelt journeys. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you stay safe, stay strong, and never forget that your life, your choices, and your voice will always matter.